Hello, Acceleration Nation. We are here with a new podcast format that we're testing out called The Sick Truth, where myself and I'm Alan Stein, for those of you that don't know, and my Chief Creative Officer, Jay Cross, are going to sit down and talk about some topics, dig into it, and get to the sick truth. No punches pulled, and we'll just get to it. So, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jay, where we're going to talk about one of a very timely topic that's going on nowadays.
Yes. Well, thanks for the introduction. First of all, I'm excited to be talking with you today, as I always am. We have great conversations, and I think the two of us recently decided to, why not put some of these conversations that we're having offline online and see who's interested. Um, and what we're going to talk about now, we actually called an audible this morning. We had another topic in mind, but because of the Twitter layoffs, the rumored upcoming Meta layoffs, and just the wave of tech layoffs that have been going on for what seems like the better part of a year now, maybe more. We thought that maybe it would be a little bit more timely, relevant, and interesting to dive into that and the impact that these layoffs are having on folks and what it might mean for individuals at other companies that maybe haven't been laid off yet, but are kind of nervous about what they're seeing in the world and trying to make sense of this new reality that that folks in tech are living in. Does that sound about right, Alan?
Spot on, Jay.
So I want to just riff on this a little bit with you because you posted on LinkedIn today some pretty candid comments about this Twitter layoff that Elon Musk put into place about a week ago, saying that he was rash, imprecise, and heartless by slashing 50% of the Twitter workforce, basically. And you contrasted that with Patrick Collison, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, who runs Stripe, and the way that he did a layoff of his own last week. He only let go 14% of his workforce, but that's still a lot.
Yeah, it's 1,000 people, I believe.
Right. And you noted that in contrast to Elon's approach, that Patrick Collison was more thoughtful, more transparent, and mature in the way that he went about this. So that's sort of the high level of what you shared. But I'm curious, just for folks that are listening and maybe haven't seen that post or are just hearing any of this for the first time, what are you getting at as far as the difference there? What made Elon's approach rash and imprecise, and what made Patrick's a little bit more thoughtful?
Yeah. So, Elon, I don't know him personally, but a lot of people, I think, get a sense of what he's about. And I was listening to a podcast from Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, Pivot, which is a fantastic podcast, talking about him. And when I was listening to how they were describing him as narcissistic, as getting rid of people that object to him, of making rash decisions, of not admitting mistakes. At first, when I jumped into that conversation and we're on election day today, I thought they were actually talking about our former president, and it's actually quite interesting to see a lot of the similarities between how they make decisions, between how it's about them. It's not about the company. It's not about the people. And those decisions will have ramifications. Those decisions will lead to lack of loyalty. Those decisions will lead to lack of employee engagement. Those decisions will lead to lack of future success of the company. And Amy Edmondson, an esteemed thought leader about psychological safety, she's a professor at Harvard Business School, talks a lot about the importance of psychological safety. And she did research with Google while I was there, and they identified that psychological safety is the single biggest important component to team and organizational success. And when you have the lack of that, when people are fearful of their job, fearful of rash decisions, fearful of ramifications of that, you're going to get a very different sort of employee loyalty, a very different sort of employee engagement, and you're not going to get the results. Assuming Elon wants to create success out of his new $44 billion purchase, which, by the way, I'm not sure how much of that came out of his pocketbook
I think I
versus
read that
it.
a lot of VC money went into that. That he didn't spend a ton of his own, but I don't have the exact figures. It's a lot of
Yeah,
money, no matter where it came from.
And I believe a lot of foreign investment also, which again seems very similar to the Trump playbook. Um, so I don't think he's going to get the results that he wants unless the result he wants is personal attention and spotlight shown on him, because that's
Mm.
all that people are talking about, or at least in my sphere that I listen to, about Twitter. What's going on with Twitter? And I've actually seen that there's been an increase in signups on Twitter, but there's been also a mass exodus of people, some by choice and some being ejected from the platform because of dissenting opinions, which is very interesting because that's a big reason
Mm.
why Elon wanted to take over Twitter, is to have freedom of speech. But if AOC criticizes Elon, well, she's gone. She's off the
Yeah.
platform. So um, I forget exactly what your question was, but it's just a very interesting case study of what he is doing there to Twitter versus what Patrick Collison is doing. He's a very thoughtful leader. Um, there was a great interview with him on the Tim Ferriss podcast where you just hear what a thoughtful, introspective, um, intelligent
Mm.
person that this guy is. Just not just intellectually intelligent, but emotionally intelligent as well. And my hunch is that Stripe will continue to prosper and continue to turn things around and be very successful. And Twitter is going to be blow up in a flame of flame and smoke.
Well, so before we go further into this, talk for a second about the way that Patrick Collison handled his layoffs at Stripe, because you mentioned what Elon did. What did Patrick do that was different, like noticeably different from your vantage point?
He was transparent. He took personal accountability. He said, I don't, I forget if he said I made mistakes or we made mistakes as a leadership team, but he took accountability for it. He also was very empathetic to the employees that it impacted. And like, it's just textbook, well, of how to handle difficult news. And
Mm.
he was extremely transparent with it after the fact. Um, you can go to Stripe's website, and there is the letter that he wrote to his employees that he has posted there on their site. At least it was a couple days ago. I'm sure it's still up
Mhm.
there. And that transparency and that accountability and that empathy is extremely different than leaks getting out to media and handling these layoffs by tweet. So he took accountability, he took ownership of it. He also offered an optimistic frame of reference at the end of the communication. But another thing that I noticed, so us at Kadima, we track how many jobs are open on a weekly basis. And we track those. And the last data pull that we pulled was Twitter still had 92 jobs open available right now. Right now, if you go to twitter.com/jobs, there are actually 90. Yesterday was 92. So I guess two of those roles got either filled. And it says on their website, find your team and love where you work. And they have pictures of two women on that site looking relatively engaged. My hunch is it's going to be really hard to find two people at that organization right now that say that they are part of a team and love where they work right now.
Yeah.
For Stripe, because I was curious to see, like, when my son pulled the jobs for Stripe, he said, "Oh, Dad, I can't find any open jobs at Stripe. It looks like they changed their career site," and they did.
Hmm.
So on their career site, it says expand economic access across the globe, and there's no open roles right now. And instead, it says we're actively reviewing our hiring plans and will post roles as soon as they become available. So they've taken some action there and they're communicating transparently. This is a company that is less than 5 years old, maybe less than 10 years old, run by
Hmm.
Patrick Collison. So it's just a totally different contrast of how they're handling things.
Well, I think that's clear. I mean, I think you actually did a good job of juxtaposing the different way in which these two CEOs handled the layoff, which obviously, I've I was part of a wave of layoffs years ago at a much smaller company, way smaller than either of Twitter or Stripe. And I think they let go like 40% of the workforce or something, which is huge,
Yeah.
percentage wise. And I know that that's probably never easy for any CEO or company to do, but the difference in the way that it was presented, messaged, delivered, is pretty stark in this case. So I know that was one of the things that we wanted to touch on that I think you did a great job of is that difference. But I think all like bigger picture, stepping back, zooming out a little bit from these two examples, and even from the rumored upcoming meta layoffs that are rumored to be pretty big. I think the reason that we were interested in this topic of layoffs is that it kind of underscores a larger point that you make often, which is the fact that everyone that is employed everywhere by any company is employed at will, and basically that this sort of thing can happen at any moment, and that it is beneficial for employees to be fully cognizant of what it means to be an employee at will. Um, so, what like can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that was the thing that actually made you initially bring this up to me is that like, yeah, this is an example of what can happen and why you shouldn't psychologically put all your eggs necessarily in one basket of just your current employer, and why you should always be looking around and just being aware that this is a thing that can take place.
Yeah, great point. And I do harp on that employee at will employment. This is a Google offer letter. This was a client that I worked with, helped her negotiate for some more compensation. Actually, in this case, we did not get her more compensation because she wound up taking a different role instead. But
Mm-hmm.
this is part of the 20-page Google offer letter. And I highlighted this. Page 2 of the letter, it says at will employment. And the highlighted part says employment relationship may be terminated with or without cause and with or without notice at any time by you or Google. So
Mm-hmm.
that means that they can fire you for any reason at any time. And that means that you can leave for any reason at any time. That's one part where this is highlighted. Again, Google is hiring smart people that can comprehend things like this. Granted, I don't know if people are reading the 20-page letter, but they are so adamant about this part of the offer that on the next page, they do this in all caps. I don't know if they have all caps anywhere else in the employment letter, actually. I don't believe there's any other all cap um,
Yeah.
section of the employment letter. But this is what Google says in section 1 at will employment. My Google employment is for an undefined period and is at will employment, which means it may end at any time with or without cause or notice. No agreement providing otherwise is permitted or valid unless it is in writing and approved by a vice president or a senior vice president in Google LLC's legal department. So this
Mm-hmm.
means that this pretty much applies to all 175,000 Google employees, minus maybe 10 to 20 at the senior most level that are such in high demand employees that they were able to carve out a special exception to get some sort of contract. So when Andy Rubin, who was the leader of Android, got fired, I think he got fired, left Google for inappropriate behavior. Google had to pay him a shit ton of money because he
Mm-hmm.
was probably someone that had his contract approved by a VP or SVP in Google's legal department. When I got fired from Google, I did not have any sort of exception, so they just walked me out.
And that would apply to virtually 100% of the people that would be listening to this as well. I would imagine.
Yes, yes. And if you are someone that has a special deal with Google's SVP or VP in Google's LLC legal department, you should not be listening to this sick career podcast
Right.
because you're at a different stage in your career and you can be hiring lawyers and other people with more expertise, not necessarily more expertise, but more ability to wrangle deals in your favor. But to your point, 99.94% of Google employees are signing this contract.
And so I think probably a lot of the people who are listening would hear all of what was just said and go, yeah, I mean, I know that at will employment's a thing. I know they can let me go at any time. I know I can leave at any time. And yet, I think one of the things that you talk about often as well is that people don't really steer their career with that in mind. They intellectually know that the company can let them go at any moment, but they basically operate by putting everything into that basket. And when an event like this does happen, like a layoff comes along, that all of a sudden tosses them back out into the open sea of the job search, they're often not ready for that because they haven't really been exploring their options, going on interviews, kind of getting the reps of the job search process from the candidate side. um and I think you're a little bit different because I know back in, and I'm jumping around a little bit, and to just to kind of underscore this point, back in 2007 and 8, you actually were part of a layoff at American Express,
Yep.
right? And so, like, what was that like for you? Number one, and then I guess number two, would you say that that experience of going through a layoff kind of drove the point home deeper that, like, yeah, this at will employment stuff is real, they can let you go, they will let you go as soon as it makes business sense, all the kumbaya, we're a family crap goes right out the
Yeah.
window, and in fact it probably was never really real to begin with.
Totally true. I have lots of pet peeves. One of my pet peeves is referring to your company as your family. So even
Yeah.
within Kadima, I call us the dream team. I don't call us a family. I'm not inviting everybody at Kadima to my kid's wedding or their bat mitzvah or things of that nature. I have great affinity to you and folks on the team, but we're
Yep.
not family. Um, I'm not obligated to invite you to things, which I would actually enjoy inviting you to things. But sometimes I got to invite I'm not going to use someone's name in my family, but maybe like Aunt Lucy. I don't have an Aunt Lucy, but I have to
Yeah.
invite Aunt Lucy to the family engagement because she's my aunt. Um,
Right.
I don't have to invite Jay to my family event because you're part of my company. So
Right.
there's a difference between the family and the company. Um, and
As there should be.
yeah, there was this boss I had at Google, the director he was Jewish and used to call his team when he referred it to me because I was Jewish also. He would call us his mishpacha, which is I think a Yiddish word for family.
Hmm.
And I didn't really correct him because he was my superior and things of that nature. But that used to piss me off to no end. I was like, dude, I am not your family. And he
Right.
wound up actually not supporting me during times of need later down the line when if he was my family, if he was my wife or he was my dad, he would have helped support me in some situations that he didn't. So I wasn't surprised that he didn't support me, but it was just bullshit that he was calling it his mishpacha. Um,
Right.
and he just did that to me and a couple other the Jews on the team that knew what that word meant. To your point, at American Express during the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and we were battening down the hatches and we were doing riffs, which are people should know the difference between a layoff and a termination versus a RIF, which is a reduction in force.
Hmm.
And there are different legal requirements that the company has to adhere to. I'm not sure of all the details, but with a RIF, reduction in force because of economic condition or because of the way the business unit is performing or not performing, there's a lot less legal um, hurdles that the company needs to do. They could just say, hey, we're cutting 14% of our staff. We need to reduce our spending and we're going to reduce these 1,000 employees and we're going to do a decent job to make sure that there's no discrimination there. And they do need to report on the ratio of age and gender and some other criteria to the government to make sure that they're just not eliminating all the old people or all the black people or all the women or things of that nature.
Hmm.
Versus when you fire an individual, it's a big pain in the ass. And I've had to fire people.
Because
And
why?
You
why is it a pain in the ass to fire an individual?
you have to demonstrate that it is terminated at will, even though it says your at will employment. The companies need to demonstrate that there is a reason for it to protect their asses from
Hmm.
getting sued because of discrimination. So I, as a white dude, they probably did not need to do as much of blocking and tackling before I was jettisoned from a number of companies.
Blocking. I just want to add something real quick because I think this is really interesting. Like when you say blocking and tackling, I think you've told me before that what will often happen is when the company has decided, behind closed doors that they're going to let an individual go, they very rarely will just instantly swiftly fire them, and actually they'll spend a sustained period of time, could be weeks, could be months depending on the details, and they'll spend that time actually building a case to, and I guess this plays into your point of the reason they build that case is so that if they get sued, they have legs to stand on to say this is why we let this person go.
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking about by blocking and tackling? Is them just kind
yeah,
of doing that reconnaissance to back up their decision?
yes, and that they applied that same process to white people as they did to black people, as they did to men, as they did to women, because they don't want to get sued. So there are things called performance improvement plans and performance enhancement plans, but usually the most common term is PIP, performance improvement
Yep.
plan,
Yep.
where they have to document things. They don't have to, honestly. Like that employee at will document that I just read from Google means that they do not need to document that. They do not need to give you 30 or 60 or 90 days warning. The
Right.
reason why they choose to do that is to mitigate the likelihood that you sue them. Because even though I was terminated from Google, it wouldn't stop me from potentially suing them, even though it says employee at will. If I thought that it was done because of discriminatory purposes or because I was old.
Mm-hmm.
I was like 44, I think, when that happened at Google. Uh, Actually, it's 2016, so it's 40, yeah, 43, 44. Um, so they do that blocking and tackling typically to cover their ass. It's a CYA procedure.
Yeah. Yeah. Once the guillotine comes down, right, and the layoffs happen, and you're one of the affected employees by it, and you're kind of shoved back out into the cold. I'm not going to ask like what do you do, because it's not like we're going to tell someone that just lost their job at Twitter, well, go do 12 jumping jacks and it'll all be better. Like it's a tough pill to swallow, right? Like
Yeah.
there is just some unavoidable pain to it. But at the same time, I also know that you come from a place of saying, I'm trying to remember the exact word that you use. You tell people like, hey, don't get stuck in rubbernecking, right? Like
Yeah.
don't dwell on the pain of it. So like, you work with people every day. You have private clients that you're working with to help get them some of the best jobs that there are at the best companies in the world. And you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in big tech from all the time that you spent there, the people that you know. So you're in a better position than most, I would think, to answer this question. Like, what do you say to somebody that has just been laid off, maybe for the first time? What do you say to somebody who's just like, shit, like I am, I feel like I am not even at the bottom of the barrel. I'm like underneath the barrel right now. What do you say to those people to give them any kind of direction in the aftermath of that?
So are these people at risk or people that have been axed?
People that have actually been laid off that are
Yeah.
now like, okay, like, I'm trying to orient myself in this new reality that I'm in as a laid off person.
So first off, I'll relate a little bit what happened when I was surprisingly let go at Google, and it wasn't so dissimilar when I was surprisingly let go at Facebook, and when I wasn't surprised at some other ones. What I did when they walked me out of the office at Google, I first off I couldn't even go back to my desk. They had to walk me out, and they got my jacket and they got my backpack, and I got on the subway. I was kind of a little bit in a daze while I was on the subway. It was midday, so there was not a lot of people on the subway at that point during the day. And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as I got off the subway in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, my first call was to one of my mentors who was very connected in the industry. And it was actually the guy who got me into Google in the first place. It's like, Ben, I just got canned. I told him the story a little bit, but I was like, hey, if you know anyone that I can start talking to, let me know. And he actually immediately was able to give me a couple of good connections for me to start talking to. I started doing that that day. So not everybody can act as quickly as that.
Right.
But I was like, hey, this shit happened. I'm not going to be able to go back and protest this. I actually did try to protest it. I actually wound up having drinks with my boss at that time because he did not know that this had happened. He was kind of removed from this because it was an HR related issue. It's a long story that we can talk about in another podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I did talk to him, but that was like 2 or 3 days later. But I realized that there was no way that he could reverse the decision. It was out of his control. Um, but my first course of action was okay, here's what happened. What am I going to do about it?
Yep.
And the next thing I did after that is I looked on LinkedIn. And what I did was I downloaded all my connections into a CSV, into like an Excel file. And I started to look at who I knew at the companies. And I started to create a target list of companies I was going to focus on. So I know I'm a little bit crazy with this shit. And this is probably what led me to be passionate about careers and got me into academia. And I don't think that's how most people would react. And there's definitely a time for like absorbing it and going and getting through that process and maybe seeing a therapist or talking it through with people. And I did actually try to call my wife too. I think I might have first called Melanie and she didn't pick up. So then my next call was Ben, or my first call was Ben, and then my second call was Melanie. I forget which was which. Um, and she tried to be empathetic, but I was like, okay, this is what I got to do. So long story there, but my advice is this stuff can happen to anybody. This stuff can happen at any time. There are definitely signals out there that can indicate if you are at risk. So, to your point, Meta, for whatever reason, the news is leaking out there that mass layoffs are coming, and the definition of mass could be in the thousands, could be in the hundreds, could be in the tens of thousands. I don't know what those numbers are. They have 85,000 employees or so. There's going to be some number of them that are at risk this week. If for everybody at Meta, for everybody at every company, I always advise ABL. Always be looking because this stuff can happen to you at any time for any reason. And yeah, sometimes it's because of your ineptitude. Sometimes, but more often, it's because of reasons outside of your control. And you just need to be prepared for that.
Before I lose the thought, in terms of being prepared, one thing that this calls to mind for me is that layoffs, or the threat of layoffs even, they really illustrate the value of having a network, which is something that another thing you talk about in great detail in a number of different forums. But a lot of times after layoffs happen, I'll see these posts on LinkedIn that who've been laid off will make, and I'm sure you've seen similar ones. And I sort of refer to these as like message in a bottle type posts where the
Right.
person will
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I just got laid off from such and such company here. I work in marketing. My skills are, HubSpot or this and that. If
Yeah.
anybody knows anyone, can you please, hook me up?" And not that there's anything wrong with sending those out there, because I'm sure sometimes that does result in those people getting introduced or referred or whatnot. But if you have a network that you've been cultivating over time, if you've been building genuine relationships, then when you get laid off, I mean, you might still make the message in the bottle post if you want to, but you also have the benefit of saying, okay, I know 5 people, I know 10 people that I can pick up the phone or send an email to, and I'm probably going to have a higher success probability with them because I know them than I'm going to have by just blasting my please hire me message out into the wind on all of LinkedIn. So, I mean, having a network is valuable in any time, whether you're about to be laid off or have been laid off, or whether you're securely employed. It's always a good idea to have a network. But that's something that's come to mind a number of times throughout this podcast and discussions that we've had around layoffs. Is like, man, it really is beneficial to have one now, because that's when it can really, quite literally save your ass.
Yeah, and I love that metaphor about the message in a bottle. So if you are stuck on an island and the only thing that you have is a bottle and a piece of paper and a pencil, yeah, write that message in a bottle and put it into the sea. And perhaps if you live in the movies, someone will read that message and help you out.
Mm-hmm.
However, most likely you're not on an island with just a bottle and a pencil and a piece of paper. So, therefore, use the tools that you have at your disposal and be more targeted with your message. So, if you are going to broadcast it to 900 million people on LinkedIn or whoever your connections are that will see that post, um, it's it's probably just going to continue to be out at sea, and no one's
Mm-hmm.
going to pick it up and no one's going to act on it. Um, what what I'd much higher recommend is to be more surgical with your bottle approach. And I don't know what metaphor we can use. That's better. But another thing I did, like now that you mentioned that with Google, is when I got fired from Google, I pulled down my connections on LinkedIn. I probably had about 1,200 connections. I looked through each of them individually quickly and said, okay, can this person potentially help me? And I put some sort of indicator there. And what I did next are the ones that were really close to me, I reached out directly to them. But people that were loose connections that I might not have spoken to in a number of years, I created an email, my message in a bottle, and I should try to find this, saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, terrible news. I'm all of a sudden in the midst of searching for my next job. Here are the things that I'm good at. Here are the things like that I'm looking for. If you know anyone that I can talk to
Mm-hmm.
about that, I would appreciate that. I wasn't asking for like an open job. Like if I got an open job, they would send it to me. But it was a directed message and I got a lot of responses. Maybe only like 5%, but if I sent it out to 200, that's 10. But that gave me a bunch of leads to start with, to start my conversations with. And each one of those conversations led to additional conversations and additional building of the network. So again, it's like about taking that proactive. I also realize that I'm a unique individual. I am someone who's very logically driven, not very
Yep.
emotional. So maybe I'm on the spectrum or something like that. I don't know. But that's how I handled it. And that enabled me to very quickly land a great consulting job at Datadog that then led me to a VP of operations job at Andela, both startups, because I was actually interested in working for a smaller company then because I had just come out of Amex, I had just come out of Google, and I was actually intrigued about is the grass really greener in the startup world? So those were intriguing opportunities for me at the time. So I did send a message in the bottle, but it was very directed. It was right off the island that I wanted people to
Right.
grab that bottle. And I made it very easy for them to open the bottle as well. I'm guessing I wrote a decent subject line. I'm sure not as effective as you with your skilled copywriting ability, which gets us like a 35-40% open rate with our email
Yeah.
messages. But like to just cast a bottle out in the wide sea, good luck getting someone to read it, to open that bottle and read it and do something. You got to take proactive control out of from your career and your outcome.
Yeah. Well, and to tell you the truth, that's a perfect segue to sort of taper this conversation. I think what I would state to folks listening to this and closing is that if you've been laid off, if you're concerned about possible coming layoffs, or if you just want to sort of get to a point in your career where you don't even really have to be concerned about this because you know that you have a network and the ability to pivot and navigate to a next step in your career. um, I would encourage you to go to kademacareers.com. if you haven't already done this, and sign up for the email list that's there. Because what actually we do is, in addition to sending weekly emails with Alan's career acceleration insights and advice and what have you, is we actually host these live free events, these talks on Zoom on a monthly basis, where Alan goes into even deeper detail about some of what we've covered today in terms of building a network, in terms of making contact with connected insiders at companies, and basically just becoming an all-around savvier candidate. Like, that's what I've taken away. I've probably spent the better part of this year working with Alan, and what I've taken away from getting to know him and his expertise and what he actually does with his clients and with his readers is that Alan is somebody who has a similar level of sophistication as these companies have. One of the things, Alan, that we talk about a lot is that there's this asymmetry of information between the company, who hires tons and tons and tons of people all the time, who knows everything inside and out, on the one hand, and then the candidate, who maybe goes on, interviews 5 or 6 times in their entire lives and never really builds that, like, anywhere close to that same level of competency and insight that the companies have. And as a result, candidates often hit a wall where they're not able to get the jobs they want, or they're getting ghosted, or just getting stuck at different parts of this process. And I think that what you really do is you level that playing field, and you level the level of insight and understanding. And so the folks that work with you, or even just the folks that pay attention to what you have to say, I think, they become more advanced and savvy to the way that the game really works, to how companies really operate, how hiring really is, what it really means to build a network. And as a result of that, when they face layoffs or other adversity and challenges, it may still be painful and difficult, but they have the tools and the understanding to actually steer themselves in whatever reality they find themselves in. And you're, in my view, one of those top 0.0001% experts who actually can impart this understanding to candidates. So all that to say, if you want to, uh, in a sense, like, immunize yourself from fears about layoffs, and give yourself the tools and the confidence to be able to navigate these choppy seas that people are in nowadays, go to kademacareers.com, sign up for the email list. I think that if you absorb what Alan has to say over a period of time, you will find that a lot of those fears go away, because now you actually kind of more clearly see the way that the job market works, and will be able to take whatever actions you need to take, because now you'll kind of be hip to how the game is really played. Is it fair to say, Alan? I don't want to oversell you, but I think that's actually pretty accurate.
I think it's pretty spot on. And like, people listen to what these companies say because the companies are really good at PR and communication, and they have whole teams lined up about communication. Maybe not Elon and Twitter, because maybe it's
Right.
just whatever he says. But most of these companies have communication teams, and they spin shit all the time. And what I try to do, like, I've had this stuff spun to me at a number of organizations, and it's not like it's malicious intent, but they're worried about how it lands on employees and how employees are going to interpret it. Rather than
Mm-hmm.
investing the time to actually explain the truth, they focus more on polishing the perception. So, what these jam sessions are that you're alluding to, and our next one's on December 7th, if you're listening to this podcast in a timely manner, December 7th of 2022. And actually, now that we talk about this, I'm going to change the topic of that jam session, because I think a more timely um, topic is about how to prepare for potential layoffs, how to equip yourself for those potential impending layoffs. And if you have been impacted by those layoffs, what to do proactively to make sure that you land somewhere great, quickly, and confidently. So, and those sessions are great. Like, they're called the jam session because I like acronyms, and it stands for job acquisition method.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually only 20 or 30 minutes of me talking, giving a little context and data about this situation. But then it's more open Q&A. And last time we were inundated by questions, actually. So we didn't get a chance to answer them all. So we got to figure out a way to do that more in a scalable manner. But yes, do sign up for our newsletter, and our newsletter will tell you about our next jam session on December 7th. I created Kadima for a couple of reasons. One, I was tired of keep getting fired from companies because I don't play well with leadership that is hypocritical, harassing, or bullying. And I'm not going to say which one is which because then they could claw back some of my settlement. um,
Mhm.
but I created Kadima to level the playing field between the employee and the employer, between the candidate and the interviewer. And there's a dichotomy of, or there's an asymmetry of information that you alluded to, Jay. And it puts the employee and the candidate at a disadvantage versus the company. So let's flip the script and give individuals the opportunity to succeed and to get as much, if not more, value out of the company than the company is getting out of you.
That's what it's all about. Beautifully said, sir. I think on that note, we'll wrap this conversation. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm looking forward to our next one.
Sounds good, Jay. Always a pleasure.